Hello, welcome to the Psalming Effect. Today is January the 23rd, 2023, and it's my first time in this new calendar year, to record an episode of the Psalming Effect. I've been on hiatus since the middle of December, largely just because of there's been some illness and there's been some other things going on in my life. And of course, there was the holiday break at the end of the year where I traveled to Alberta and spent time with my family. But now I'm back at home and I'm settling into a regular schedule, and here we go. And today I want to, as I read from the book of Psalms and present a meditation from there, which is what the Psalming Effect is all about. I have this with me. I think you can see it on the screen. It's a calculator. Okay, I was having a conversation with some of my friends the other day. I think it was my curling buddies, and we were talking about how when we were growing up, we all had to learn how to use calculators. By the time we got into high school and we were doing our sort of high-level math courses and things like physics that also, and even chemistry that required doing complicated equations, we were allowed to do. In fact, we were taught to use calculators to do our calculations on in order to speed things up. In the younger grades and in some of the other classes, we did have to learn how to do things by just with pen and pencil and paper, and so that we learned how the calculations were done. But when it came to problem solving and doing equations in chemistry and those topics, we just needed to get to the answer, and so the calculations were done with a calculator. So that got me to thinking about how a lot of decisions that we make in our lives are really calculations. Okay, we have a bunch of different factors that enter into the decision, and we calculate all of those things into the equation, and then we reach a decision. And so we do that when it comes to medical care. Okay, when do I need to go see the doctor? If they recommend certain things, am I going to have that surgery? Am I going to take medication? Am I going to do that treatment, or am I going to go visit someone else? And there's a lot of things that go into the equation. The same thing happens with education. Where am I going to go to school? What am I going to study? If I go there, how many years will it take me, and what will be the cost, and what's the value of that degree compared to training I could take somewhere else? There's, so I could talk about lots of things. I could talk about parenting. I could talk about gardening. We could talk about, mechanics, fixing our car. We're always calculating things. But what I've noticed in the years that I've grown up is in a lot of areas of life, God is not included in the equation anymore, whereas he used to be. And more, especially in public life, people are not wanting us as believers, as Christian people, to bring our God, our faith in God, onto the public stage. When we go to the hospital, when we go to the courtroom, when we go to the classroom, it seems like wherever we go, when we talk about politics, or we talk about science, we talk about weather, we talk about whatever it is, we're sort of forced, really, in a lot of ways, to keep our concept of God out of the equation. They don't want to hear that. A lot of the calculation that goes into decision making in those different areas of life no longer include God in the equation. And And it's getting to be more and more that way. I don't think, in Canada at least, that we're in a situation where our Christian faith is being oppressed necessarily. Might be happening in your situation and in some specific circumstances. But I think overall, the more correct word is that it's being suppressed. Our Christian faith is being suppressed, not oppressed. They're not telling us, the country, the culture that we live in is not telling us, no, you can't believe those things anymore. Stop being a Christian. They're not really telling us that. But they're telling us that's a private thing. Religion is a private thing. Keep your Christian faith to yourself. Don't bring it to the workplace. Don't bring it to the public stage. That's between you and your God, maybe your family. But, if we're getting together to work or to play or to do business or whatever we're going to do, God doesn't need to be part of the equation, even though I know you're a believer. And that's what I mean by suppression. Our Christian faith is being suppressed. And so I think it's interesting then to read Psalm 14. Not a long psalm. It's 7 verses. I think I've probably read from it before. But I was thinking about this as I was having this discussion about calculating equations. Because this psalm talks about those who make those calculations without God in the equation. And it talks about them being, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. And what that leads to, and you'll hear that in the psalm, is that we end up establishing, or at least following patterns in social life and in the arenas of life where we're no longer living according to what is good, that we oftentimes accept standards that are actually morally not good, that are evil. And sometimes even in the name of justice and in the name of trying to do the right thing, because God is not included in the equation, what many people in our culture and many institutions think is the right thing to do is actually evil by God's standards and by standards of truth. Of course, we live in a culture that doesn't like to hear that there's truth and falsehood. And they argue over what truth and falsehood is. So, anyways, as I read this psalm, I want you to listen to what it says about those who reject the concept of God and those of us who believe in the concept of God and believe we are the people of God and are depending on that in our lives. So, enough said, let me just read the psalm. Psalm 14. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. Have they no knowledge? All the evildoers who eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call upon the Lord. There they are in great terror, for God is with the generation of the righteous. You would shame the plans of the poor, but the Lord is his refuge. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. When the Lord restores the fortunes of his people, let Jacob rejoice, let Israel be glad. Of course, this psalm comes from the framework of ancient Israel, and so it talks about Israel and Jacob and the fortunes of God's people from that point of view. But for our contemporary framework, those of us who have Christian faith, this psalm also speaks to where we are. we're in this environment where our Christian faith is being suppressed, where those who say there is no God are making a lot of the rules by which our culture and our world functions. And so there are often instances of injustice and evil, of moral failure because of that. And so it's important to us to hear what the psalmist says, that we shouldn't fear that that we're going to be destroyed, or that because of our faith we're going to be crushed, but rather we need to understand that God is going to restore the fortunes of his people. Now, whether that means it's going to happen in our lifetime, that it's going to happen in our place where we live, that somehow the direction of things are going to be reversed, and once again, Christian faith will be valued and honored and appreciated, and will be better respected and accepted for our beliefs in God. Whether that happens in our lifetime or our situation, the hope that we have and the promise that we have is that God does have a plan. When the new creation comes into being and all of what we see now is replaced, that will be for sure when God restores the fortunes of his people. And that will, of course, be a time of judgment. And for those who have been living without putting God in the calculations, that will be a time of reckoning. So I just want us to think about that. I want you to think about that, especially as we've now embarked on a new year. You'll be making a lot of decisions this year, planning vacations, making decisions at work, planning things with your family, and every day there's a bunch of little decisions. And I just want to encourage you to spend time. This is part of the reason for the psalming effect. Spend time very regularly, daily I would recommend, reading from God's Word, even if it's just a small portion, reflecting on it and praying to God and listening to him and being shaped. Let your thinking be shaped by him. And so that whatever you're doing throughout the day, and when you're making choices and when you're making decisions, and you're calculating mentally, of course, and emotionally and all the rest, that you are including God in the equation. Okay? So use a calculator that has God as one of the buttons. I'm just going to go back to my calculator for a moment. My calculator has a lot of functions. Operations like division and multiplication, addition, and of course it has the numbers, and I have to push certain keys to make certain calculations. And of course you always push the equal sign to get the result. When you're making calculations in your life on a daily basis, and of course even importantly on a large scale, like about who am I going to marry, what am I going to do for work, where am I going to live, those are sort of big decisions. But whatever calculations you're making, don't forget to press the God button to let him shape your thinking and just be a part of the calculation. God doesn't ask us, and it would be foolish to ignore what we see with our eyes, to see what's going on before us. But we need to do life with more than just what we pick up through the senses, what we read in a book, what people tell us. We also need to listen to the Creator who lives among us and in us and through us, who surrounds us, and who is behind everything that we see in a test tube, that we can measure and empower with a battery, etc. God is behind all of that, and we need to include him in the calculation. when we're making choices, when we're making decisions. And so that's how I want to encourage you, especially for this week. And read Psalm 114 on your own. Read it, I would say read it every day this week. That's where I think the Psalms are most effective, is not just hearing it once and what did he really say there? Read it every day, and by the end of a week of reading Psalm 14, the truth and the blessing of God's Word will sink into your life, and you will experience the benefit of what I call the psalming effect. And remember this, Jesus is for you. Jesus is for me in 2023. Sorry, that's the slogan that I'm living by this year. Jesus is for me in 2023.